In the last few days, China pulled off something a lot of experts didn't expect for years yet. On the very first flight of a brand new rocket, they put a satellite into orbit, then brought the booster back down out of the sky and caught it in a giant net floating out in the ocean. The clip alone is enough to go viral, and it already has, but we think the coverage chasing the "look how cool this is" angle is burying the actual story here, which is that this flight might be the first real dent in a monopoly on cheap spaceflight that's held for the better part of a decade. So in this video, we're going to walk through the pressure that forced this moment, why China chose to catch its rocket in a net instead of landing it on legs the way SpaceX does, and why the real test isn't actually the catch you just watched. It's something engineers call launch cadence, which is basically just how fast and how cheaply you can fly the exact same piece of hardware, over and over again. This chart shows the cost of putting 1 kilogram into orbit across every major rocket program over the last 15 years, and you can see exactly where the Falcon 9 pulled away from the pack. So, let's get into it. As we see it, there are at least 3 reasons this catch matters a lot more than the viral clip suggests. The first and most obvious reason is that the pressure behind this launch wasn't optional, it was existential. Over the last decade, SpaceX turned landing and reflying the same Falcon 9 booster into a routine, and that routine is what quietly built the company something close to a monopoly on cheap access to space. Doing this brought the cost of reaching orbit down to somewhere around $2,700 to $3,000 per kilogram. China's traditional single-use Long March rockets, by comparison, cost roughly $21,000 per kilogram, nearly 7 times as much. Normally, that would just be an awkward statistic to live with. But China is currently racing to build 2 enormous satellite internet networks of its own, called Guowang and the Shanghai-backed Qianfan, or Thousand Sails. And between them, these 2 projects need something like 28,000 satellites in orbit if they want any real chance of going head-to-head with Starlink. To keep the international rights to the radio spectrum these networks depend on, China has to get at least 10% of those satellites up there before the end of 2026. Launching 28,000 satellites on rockets you can only fly once isn't something any country can really afford to do, which meant Beijing needed a reusable rocket years before it actually had one ready. The second reason is that everything that happened right before this flight suggested it was far more likely to end in fire than in success. Sticking a soft, controlled rocket landing is notoriously hard, and unsurprisingly, China's private space sector has been learning that the expensive way. Back in September 2024, the startup Deep Blue Aerospace tried a high-altitude landing test with its Nebula 1 rocket, and a fault in the engine's thrust controls sent the booster slamming into the ground and exploding barely half a meter short of the pad's center. Just over a year later, in December 2025, a second firm, Landspace, got its Juki 3 rocket all the way to orbit, only for the booster to explode during landing after a problem in its engine's combustion process. Even Elon Musk had publicly acknowledged how aggressively these Chinese companies were closing the gap on SpaceX's own designs. But the one piece nobody had actually pulled off yet was the landing itself, which is exactly why it's remarkable that the state-run Long March 10B, a 63-meter rocket flying for the very first time, managed to stick a landing that 2 well-funded private competitors had just failed at, months earlier. Engineers in the control room reportedly broke down in tears when the hooks caught. The third reason is the method itself. In short, a lot of the commentary around this catch has treated the net as some kind of downgrade from SpaceX's landing legs, basically the budget option. But the physics actually points the other way. Every kilogram of hardware bolted onto a rocket is a kilogram of payload you can't sell to a satellite customer, and landing legs are heavy, complicated, and have to survive the trip to the edge of space and back on every single flight. By moving the heavy shock-absorbing hardware onto the recovery ship instead of the rocket, Chinese engineers only had to bolt a handful of lightweight hooks onto the booster itself. It also solves a targeting problem. Landing on a fixed deck needs millimeter-level precision, while a moving, dynamically adjusting net on the recovery ship, nicknamed the Navigator, gives the rocket a target window of roughly 54 by 54 meters to aim for, more like a giant, forgiving mitt than a bullseye. Anyway, aerospace commentator Scott Manley pointed out that the booster, a piece of hardware roughly the height of a 20-story building, came down looking like a smoking chimney, almost certainly leaking hydraulic fluid from the stress of the catch. It clearly wasn't a picture-perfect landing, but the net held anyway, which is sort of the whole point. The entire design is built to tolerate exactly that kind of mess. All 3 of these reasons point the same way. This wasn't a lucky fluke, and it wasn't just a clip built for social media. It was years of pressure finally finding a release valve. That said, one successful catch doesn't hand China a working reusable rocket program on its own. Remember that term from the start of the video, launch cadence. SpaceX's real achievement was never the landing by itself, it was turning that trick into a rhythm, something close to 165 launches a year, or about one every other day. China's state-owned launch contractor, the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, has already said it plans to refly this exact booster before the end of 2026. If it actually manages that on anything close to that timeline, it proves the net isn't a gimmick, it's a genuinely scalable way into orbit. And there's a much bigger prize riding on this than internet satellites. This same rocket family underpins China's roadmap for putting astronauts on the moon by the end of the decade and standing up a permanent base at the lunar South Pole in the years just after, where ice buried in permanently shadowed craters could one day be processed into rocket fuel. The US still officially has its Artemis program, targeting a crewed moon landing in 2028, though most of that schedule's risk sits with a lander, Starship, that hasn't flown a crewed mission yet, so further delays wouldn't be a surprise. China's program, by contrast, runs on state-set, multi-decade planning that never has to face a ballot box. All in all, the 20th century space race was about flags and footprints. This one is shaping up to be about cost per kilogram and how often you can fly, and for the first time, China just showed it isn't only playing catch-up anymore.